All right, it looks like we've got some guests that are jumping on and starting to join us. We'll give a few more minutes for more of you to join, and then we'll officially get started in just a couple minutes. Again, I want to welcome everyone who, as I see our attendee list is steadily growing, and so I want to welcome everyone. We'll give just about another minute for people to go ahead and join us, and then we will officially get things kicked off, but we're thrilled to have you joining us tonight. All right, well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We're at about, just a couple minutes past 5, and hopefully we'll see more people continuing to join. But thank you all for being with us tonight, especially after work. We know everyone's busy and has a lot of personal commitments, so we thank you for your time. My name is Erin Gabert. I'm the Senior Community Impact Director at the American Heart Association, and I'm really excited about the training and the educational programming we have for you guys tonight. You may be aware that we are working on some initiatives in Kansas City, Kansas and Kansas City, Missouri that is going to address flavored tobacco products, including vaping products. And so we've got guests tonight that are going to be talking about why this work is important, as well as we have a representative from both sides of the state line that's going to be presenting. But we're just really thrilled to have all of you join us, and I'm excited for you to have this experience. A couple different housekeeping items. So this is webinar format, so we won't be able to have you come off mute if you have a question. However, the chat box is available for you. So we will encourage you that through all of the presentations, please feel free to type in your questions, and then we'll be able to address those questions and answer those questions throughout the different presentations. Make sure that when you are adding a question or a comment in the chat box, make sure that when you see where it says to type message here, make sure that that it says it's going to, that it doesn't just say all panelists. Make sure that you click on where it says all panelists and attendees, because we want everyone to be able to see those comments and questions, because it might spark more dialogue. So with that, I am thrilled to turn it over to Councilwoman Raina Park Shaw, who is from the Kansas City, Missouri City Council, and has been a really instrumental part of getting this moving. I think we've been talking about this for close to a year now, Councilwoman. So welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Erin. As she said, I am Raina Park Shaw, and I'm Councilwoman for Kansas City's 5th District. With over 25 years of healthcare administration experience, health and wellness are top priorities for me as an elected official. So I'm very excited to see that you all have joined us for this very important discussion. I also serve as the council co-chair for Kansas City's Health Commission, and reducing accessibility of fruity vaping flavors aligns very well with the work that we are doing in Kansas City. It's been an honor to work alongside Erin and Misty and the rest of the coalition to draft legislation, as she said, for about a year, prohibiting the sale of fruity vaping flavors. As a mother of 2 young men, I'm always concerned about their safety and want to make sure that they stay away from the harmful effects of vaping. The influence of to vape is everywhere. It's all around us, from peer pressure from friends to strategically targeted advertising. Our children and young people are vaping, not knowing how it is harming their bodies. The American Heart Association is working with lawmakers in Kansas City, Kansas, as she stated, to pass a ban for KCK. And I'm so proud to be the lead sponsor for the vaping ban in Kansas City, Missouri. Again, I thank you all so much for joining us this evening for a night of education and advocacy. It is my pleasure now to introduce Sterling Fulton, who is the Evaluation Director for the Center for Black Health and Equity, who is a national partner on this work. Sterling.
Okay. Yes, hello. I'm going to, hello everyone. My name is Sterling Fulton. And as Councilwoman Park Shaw said, I am the Evaluation Director for the Center for Black Health and Equity. I'd like to take you through about 400 years of history in about 40 minutes. So it's going to be a ride. We're going to be quick. We're going to be going back and forth with the facts and the figures, and I promise you're going to enjoy it. I'm kind of a history buff, so I try to interweave very interesting stories into this as well. So I know you might have questions along the way, and you might be like, oh, I don't believe that. Write all your questions and everything in the chat so we can talk about it later. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen, pull up my slides. Hopefully the technology will work. Okay, let's see. All right. Okay, why is this not PowerPoint? Here we go. Okay, let's see. Share. Uh-oh. No, this isn't good. Oh, hold on.
Sterling, it shows that it says Sterling has started sharing screen.
Okay. Has it worked? Okay.
There it is. There it is.
Okay. Woo. It asked me to share my password for something. I was like, what am I sharing my password for? No. Okay. All right, here we go. Okay. Tobacco, racism, menthol, and African Americans. Okay, as I said, I know 40 minutes just isn't a lot of time, but I'm going to provide you, like I said, an overview of over 400 years worth of history. You're going to understand when we're over how racist policy impacted African Americans, how countries and companies benefited from African American labor, and how and why menthol has become the cigarette or the flavor of choice, and the impact that the past has had on poor communities today. Okay, so, someone asked me, they said, well, African Americans have been out of slavery now for quite a while. Why are things still the way that they are? And so, I sat down and I thought about that, and I was like, okay, well, what we're going to do, I want to show you. And essentially, through some conversations with some friends, we developed a pie chart. And in this pie chart that you can see from about the recognized time that African Americans have been here in the United States. Some people think that's 1619, but actually African Americans were here earlier than that. They came through the Spanish and through the Portuguese trading ships. So Africans actually were in the Americas way before then. But I'm not going to get into all that tonight. That's not really relevant. But what is relevant is that there were 246 years of known slavery here in what was once the colonies and then became the United States of America. That was 61% of the time. The other bulk of the time was made up by Jim Crow. And then modern day times, when Jim Crow officially ended, the modern day time only makes up about 13% of all the time that peoples from Africa lived in the United States of America. Okay, so that's really important to kind of keep in mind. In that modern day period of time, that's within my lifetime. And so it's very important kind of to set that context so that you'll understand all of the things that I'm about to talk about. So, like I said, we are going to spend some time talking about slavery and Jim Crow and tobacco's impact on the modern day. But it's also very important to keep in mind as we go through this also that if these topics interest you, I encourage you to visit the national parks, the Smithsonian's, National Geographic's, their web pages, and as soon as COVID's over, actually go visit these places and see these things for yourself. Because what I'm about to show you, you can find very easily, whether either online or, like I said, at the Park Service. The history of racism, tobacco, and the economy that started it all is our collective history. It's complicated and it is not pretty, but it tells a complex story that paints the portraits of who we are today as Americans. All right, so let me tell you how it all got started. So it got started about 6,000 years ago with a crop that was called Nicotiana tabacum. And Nicotiana tabacum is part of the nightshade family. It's like peppers and tomatoes and, all that stuff. I hope everybody got something to eat, because when I start talking about that, I don't know about you, but my stomach is grumbling. And this crop was grown back, like I said, as far back as 6,000 years ago in South America. It was primarily used for medicinal and spiritual purposes. And so how did a plant that ended up started to use for spiritual purposes end up being used to enslave millions of people and create and sustain an industry that is responsible for almost 500,000 deaths per year? Okay, I'm gonna tell you that story. So I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and our namesake is Sir Walter Raleigh. And he was he was very, very fashionable and part of the Elizabethan court. And Sir Walter Raleigh was also kind of a gentleman's explorer. He came to the Americas, he got some tobacco. He brought it back to the court. And this happened around about 1585. And it was a hit. People started wearing the pouches that he wore. They started smoking tobacco. And very soon, Europeans got hooked on tobacco. It became a very expensive habit. Okay, well, the original workers for tobacco were in the North American colony were indentured white servants, and they were not held in perpetual servitude. They did not experience chattel slavery. They signed contracts with time limitations, promising to work for passage to the new colonies from Europe. And the vast majority of indentured servants, they were poor, but again, this wasn't a lifetime thing. No, it was hard work, and this was the contracts typically lasted maybe 10 years or something like that. So when they were done, they were given land, animals, and other supplies to start their own lives in the colony. And after they successfully, if they lived, after they completed their contractual obligations. So the demands for labor and land grew due to the increasing demand of tobacco in Europe. Remember I told you about Sir Walter Raleigh? Well, he was really popular and people caught on, and they demanded more and more tobacco from the Americas. And they needed someone to help grow that crop. So there was a lot of time that was needed between planting and rotating crops, and a huge demand for additional farmland happened. And anyway, I don't know how many people on the call are business people, but if you are a businessman or a woman, you know that your number one, what you're going to be spending most of your the income that you receive from your business, that number one thing is going to be labor cost. And the same happened here for the English from the English gentlemen who had the funds to actually contract with people to work here. Their number one cost was labor cost. And having indentured servants is expensive. Okay. All right. So the vast majority of, I'm going to kind of bounce over here to the African continent, and the vast majority of the African continent and its people, they weren't backwards and they weren't primitive. All right. When I was a little girl, I used to watch Tarzan movies and with Johnny Weissmuller and all of those people. And what was interesting is that's what you saw. on television, but that wasn't what was in reality. Actually, Africa already had a ready-made skilled workforce. These are some of the images that right now that are actually at the museum in Nigeria, and this shows 9th century metalwork out of the Igbo Ikubu people in Nigeria. So pre-colonial Africa was a home to some of the great civilizations, such as the Kush, the Aksum, the Mali, and Great Zimbabwe. African rulers and merchants had already established trade routes with the Mediterranean world, Western Asia, and the Indian Ocean regions, hundreds of years. I mean, these trade routes have been going on for many, 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 many years prior to European exploration in the 15th century. And okay. So I also want to show you, and this is actually a modern day picture. And I don't know if anyone knows this, but if you're ever playing Trivia Pursuit or anything like that, Europe and Europeans who were familiar with Africa knew about its immense wealth. So, you know, there was no surprise. And what happened in Africa, to give you another idea, was that in the southern region of Africa, most people think that, like I said, was backwards and backwards. The greatest number of pyramids found outside of Egypt is actually found in Sudan, in Africa. And this is a modern day picture of that. Right now, there are tours that are given of this area. These are modern day, right here, pyramids that have been recreated, that have been fixed. Here are the older pyramids that have kind of fallen down, but you can see that today. All right, so pushing through. So the transatlantic slave trade was responsible for the largest movement of people in history, not just the largest forcible placement of human beings. The enslaved Africans experience in the Americas and with tobacco began with chattel slavery, which occurred around the 15th century. It's estimated that over 20 million people were taken from their homes and sold into slavery, most of them dying along the way. So I'm going to kind of walk you through what happened. So people were captured in Africa by their chieftains. Some people were in debt. Some people had other types of rivalry issues that went on, and they were turned over to slave traders. They were marched from where they were captured, and often this could be hundreds of miles. And they were marched to the slave coast, where they actually awaited transport to America in cargo ships. Doctors would inspect the enslaved before the purchase and to determine if people could survive the voyage. So how do I know this? Or if you want to know more about this, how do you know this? Well, there is something called the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, which looks at the slave trade from approximately 1525 to 1866. And there are only 12.5 million enslaved Africans who were transported from those slave cages over to the United States. And of those, 10.7 million made it. There were records kept on people. So you can actually go back and see the records in this database. Most slaves were transported to South America and to the Caribbean, but the United States actually, well, it was the colonies before it was the United States, but 388,000 slaves were transported to the United States. To the United States. Keep in mind, the colony actually used reproduction within the colony as a way of sustaining slavery instead of bringing new people in. And so as a result, the condition of slavery could be passed on from from parent to child in perpetuity, hence the term chattel slavery. Okay. So I'm going to...
The thing that distinguishes slavery in Africa from Atlantic slavery is race. Europeans set in motion a system of slavery that was predicated on the idea that certain people as enslavable. We've learned a great deal about the Middle Passage in the last 40 years or so. The volume of the trade involved the removal of about 12.5 million people from the African continent. The Middle Passage was the middle leg of a voyage that starts in Europe. The first passage is from Europe to Africa. The Middle Passage is the journey from Africa to America. And then the third passage is the journey back from America to Europe.
The Middle Passage could take anywhere from 2 to 3 months. Men and women were separated. Men typically were held in the lower belly of the ship. The roof, if you would, was quite low, probably about 4 feet high. So people couldn't stand. African men were shackled together and were packed so closely together in a spoon-like position. And they would stay like that for pretty much the entire journey.
You're talking about hundreds of people. You're at 120 degrees. It smells terrible. There are actually people dying around you, which has to be a traumatic experience for everybody on board.
Maybe 10% of voyages, we know there was some attempt to rise up, to kill the crew, to try to turn the boat around, to change their destinies. Historians have a hard time capturing what the Middle Passage must have felt like for enslaved men and women. It's a voyage that is deeply disorienting. It's a voyage to a place that you can't anticipate. You don't know what's going to happen to you. I don't think we have adequate words to capture that experience.
I know this ain't home, but it's where you gotta be. It's time your family pays quarter.
Okay.
The thing that distinguishes slavery.
Okay. Really quickly. As she said, slavery supported an economy in which people from 4 continents derived benefits. Everyone who participated in the economy benefited from slavery. So you had bankers who loaned money. They developed slave securities to fund the expansion of plantations. There were insurance companies that actually insured commodities, the slaves as a commodity. There's stories of where the ship captain, if something was going wrong, if there was illness, they would actually kill the slaves because they knew that they would get more money from the insurance companies. Who had backed these trips. There were the slave owners who had free labor. African chieftains benefited from receiving arms and money by turning in other Africans. Shop owners made profits from the sale of goods, and accountants who maintained records. Ordinary people who purchased tobacco products, rice, clothing, cotton, also benefited as a result from slave labor. I want to make it very clear that the people taken from Africa were not backwards, lazy, dumb, or ignorant. They were members of family, farmers, they were artisans, builders, and they made an important part of African society. Their loss built America, but it drained Africa. Early African societies were disrupted by the loss and enslavement of millions of its people. And the colonizers used the skilled labor of Africans to build the economic engine, which would ultimately become the most powerful and richest nation in the world. Slavery, tobacco, and the resulting capital that was derived from it built the economic foundation of America. Now, what would justify such brutality? Well, round about 1676, before then, most people were, even people who were brought over from Africa before that time, were considered indentured servants. The first people who were brought to the Americas from Africa actually worked a particular period of time, they were freed. That all changed with Bacon's Rebellion. Now, what happened was Nathaniel Bacon, for some reason, he and the governor did not see eye to eye, and it had something to do over taxes or whatever. For what we're talking about tonight, it's not that important. But what was important was the fact that the indentured white servants and the indentured black servants and new slaves formed together to join a coalition. and they fought. And this uprising scared the landowners so much that what they did was they created a new classification of people. So African Americans actually lost their freedoms. And what ended up happening was a new classification of people who were considered white was invented. Now, the term white, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the first appearance in the print of the adjective white in reference to a white man or a person of a race distinguished by light complexion happened around 1671. Okay, and what this shift marked the beginning of the legalized concept of racial slavery. But before then, like I said, the concept of race was tied to nationalism. So, if you thought about race, you thought about your family, you thought about, a group of people, you thought about people who were French or who were Spanish. Colonial charters and other official documents written before the 1600s and the early 1700s rarely referred to European colonists as white. Racism and the social concept of racial superiority and inferiority, again, is a social construct that allowed the planting class to benefit from the work of slaves. Okay, so right about that same time, what ended up happening was that, again, tobacco took off. And in Spain, actually, and this is a picture, you can go visit it today, of the first tobacco manufacturing company in Spain. And they received tobacco from the United States, made cigarettes over in Spain and distributed them. Well, the United States, the businesses in the United States said, well, wait a minute, we can't let you do that by yourself. Oh, no, no, no. So Lorillard actually was, Lorillard was launched in the colonies, marking the beginning of the big tobacco companies. And that was founded in 1760. So I live in North Carolina, like I said, outside of the Raleigh area, and I'm kind of a little partial. But North Carolina actually became one of the biggest hubs of tobacco. Virginia used to have it, used to be the hub, Virginia and actually some places outside of Florida. But something happened that kind of changed the way things happened. Actually, there was a slave, his name was Stephen, and he was working on the farm of a Captain Slade. And he developed this new way of curing tobacco with heat that produced this really yellow, vivid, kind of bright leaf tobacco is what we call it. North Carolina is considered like the bright leaf state. This new product, it gained popularity. And bright leaf, or this cured tobacco, was soon produced throughout the region. And it did two things. Farmers quickly discovered that this new curing process made tobacco even more popular. And so it was used as a new way of making money. Now, I want you to see something that's very interesting. So when this happened, this was at about 1839, 1840. If you notice, now there were a lot of slaves living in the United States, okay? But something interesting happened around that time. 20 years later, notice the increase in slaves, almost by 1 million people. And again, remember, I said, and I told you, slaves were not being imported at this time. This is reproduction, slave reproduction. So from 1820 to 1860, the enslaved were born. Like I said, you had cotton, rice, sugar, and tobacco, all of a sudden creating this massive economy. And people are building fortunes from this. Tobacco now is becoming one of the largest crops. Well, it was at one point the largest crops, and now it is actually still one of the largest crops. So in 1860, within that 20-year period of growth, I just want to let you know there were more millionaires, all of them slaveholders, in the United States, in the southern part of the United States, than there were in the northern part of the United States. In the same year, of the nearly 4 million enslaved Americans had an economic value of $3.5 billion, making the enslaved the single financial largest asset in the entire US economy, more so than railroads, more so than any industry. It was people. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, and the final slaves were released in June 19th of 1865. Okay, and so what happened after slavery ended? Well, something really, really interesting happened, and that was during the period of time of Reconstruction. We're going to kind of blow through this. Right now, you see Jim Crow asserted itself in the South right after that period of time where you had when Reconstruction was ended. The laws supported the segregation of parks and cemeteries and theaters and restaurants in an effort to prevent any further contact between Blacks and whites as equals. And it was codified into the law. Jim Crow touched every aspect of life. Segregation was enforced in public pools, phone booths, hospitals, everywhere. As a matter of fact, some of the things that I thought was kind of very interesting, and I was looking this up. So in 1930 in Birmingham, Alabama, it was illegal for Blacks and whites to play checkers and dominoes together. In Louisiana, the Board of Trustees maintained a separate building on separate grounds for the administration, the care, instruction, and support of all blind persons of any color. I just thought that was kind of interesting. So with the rise of Jim Crow, African Americans experienced this new form of horror, driven by extreme poverty, a lack of trust in healthcare providers, a lack of adequate education. It was not a good time. Many African Americans fled the South and moved up north. It's something called the Great Migration. All right, around about that same time, the per capita consumption of cigarettes was about 54, and this is for everyone. And the reason why primarily was, number one, smoking tobacco was harsh. There was a gentleman who accidentally founded a new way of softening that experience, and it was an accident. Primarily, he ended up putting like some mentholated cough drops in his bag of tobacco. Somehow the two got mixed, and he actually invented a menthol cigarette. Well, the first menthol flavored tobacco, which he then rolled into a cigarette. His name was Lloyd Spud Hughes. Lloyd Spud Hughes. He was from Ohio, and this became very, very popular. And actually, these cigarettes, they were wide, like I said, they were the 5th most popular cigarettes in the United States at the time, and the time was about 1932. This also formed the launching of other menthol brands. Actually, Brown and Williamson launched Cool cigarettes in 1932 as well. 1956, RJR introduced Salem's, and that was the first filter tip menthol cigarette. And then Newport, which was, and I talked to you earlier about Lorillard, Lorillard launched Newport, which was named for the seaport in Newport, Rhode Island in 1957. Okay, so something also happened. Remember, I was talking about Jim Crow and how Blacks and whites were not allowed to work together. This also happened. This is actually a picture from the Winston-Salem area at a tobacco factory. Black women actually formed a union at the time, which was almost unheard of. And racism, it provided a very fertile ground, which laid the groundwork actually of civil rights unionism. And it marked the beginning of the emergence of a labor-based civil rights movement. And the process for organization also led to voter registration drives and something like that. So many companies stopped seeing African Americans as just workers, but then as a potential market. And that's important. So this one kind of event that happened, the forming of that local 22 of the Food, Tobacco, and Agriculture and Alliance Workers, kind of set the stage for that. So, and to further that, you can see the change happening in advertisements. So this is how tobacco, first of all, tobacco initially was not advertised at all towards African Americans in the beginning. But round about, like I said, round about the 1940s, that changed. And all of a sudden, the racist images actually changed to totally to something different. Okay, so and at this point, the tobacco companies began mass marketing efforts targeting African Americans as the demographic, start to earn more money. Here's another example of the same thing that happened. Now, also, I'm going to kind of rush through. So why do I have a picture here of, this is Miss Nettie Hunt and her daughter, and I'm talking about like the Supreme Court decision to ban school segregation. Why would I have that picture there? Well, I have that picture there because where you live dictates where you go to school, how much you financing, how much money that you have. And it also dictates if you have lower education, then that equates to early death and is actually a predictor of smoking. So Jim Crow laws just didn't keep African Americans in the back of the bus. Actually, Jim Crow laws kept African Americans from gaining wealth through property ownership and it kind of set the stage for a racial wealth gap, which we still experience today. Jim Crow kept African Americans poor and unhealthy, contributing to disparities in health, home ownership, and home equity. As a result of that ownership, makes up the largest share of wealth in most American families. Okay, so again, I want to say this. Those with lower socioeconomic status who use tobacco suffer more from disease and have lower smoking cessation rates and poorer health outcomes. Okay. All right. So when I was a little girl, we used to go to my grandparents' house and we used to have Sunday dinner at my grandparents' house every Sunday. And there, never failed, there was always either a Jet or an Ebony. And then in the 70s, there was a Essence magazine there. These were the primary 3 magazines that were targeted towards African Americans. This was African American Johnson Publishing, actually. And African Americans read these magazines religiously. Well, and also something was also interesting is that tobacco companies started advertising in these magazines, and they started advertising in these magazines to actually it was welcomed. It was a welcome thing because many of the magazines did not receive the same level of advertisement as other magazines did. So at the same time, tobacco companies found ways to increase their market and again to open their product sales to this burgeoning market. Okay. Okay. And it started working. So as you notice, you can see by the bell curve that in the center right there in between 1950 and 1970, that was the height of tobacco consumption. 4,500 cigarettes per capita per person was smoked was smoked in the United States. So what ended up also, there was a 1-year study about the same time that found that the 3 major African American publications, I talked about Ebony, Jet, and Essence, received proportionately higher profits from cigarette advertisements than any other magazine. And also between 1998 and 2002, Ebony was 10 times more likely than People to contain ads for menthol cigarettes. And you can see here, these are some menthol cigarettes ads that appeared in publications. Another thing that happened too is that cigarette companies started sponsoring events, trying to maintain a positive image and receive public support amongst African Americans by contributing to higher educational institutions, elected officials, civic and community organizations, and scholarship programs. Tobacco companies took advantage, offering funding at a time when other funding sources weren't necessarily available due to racism. Okay, so, and then also big tobacco practices predatory practices, advertising, marketing practices when it comes to tobacco consumption and also menthol cigarettes. It is actually cheaper to buy tobacco products in African American communities. Advertisement is more predominant in African American communities. And actually, it is estimated that there are over 375,000 tobacco retailers in the United States. And that is 27 times more than McDonald's, if you can believe it, as well as 28 times more than Starbucks. They're disproportionately all located in low income communities. And so, although I didn't really kind of get into redlining, I did show the picture of the mom and the daughter on the steps of the Supreme Court. Well, lower income neighborhoods are also more likely to have tobacco retailers near schools than other neighborhoods. So, a 2007 study found that there are close to 10 times more tobacco advertisements per person in areas where there's African American majorities as compared to white majority areas. All right, and this actually it works. So I want to we started looking at the Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas area. And so I know that we actually kind of picked on Kansas City, Missouri, instead of Kansas City, Kansas. We suspect that we're going to find the same thing with Kansas City, Kansas. But for tonight, Kansas City, Missouri, and all the people who are there from Kansas City, Missouri. Sorry, picking on you just a little bit. But so what we did was we went out to the U.S. Census, and we just kind of looked. There's actually this really cool tracker on the U.S. Census webpage. It gives you quick facts. You can enter in information, and it gives you these really cool maps. I would encourage you to do this. And so what this did was this kind of, we typed in Kansas City, Missouri, and it gave us population estimates. Okay, so my assumption, I'm not from your area. If I am wrong, please forgive me. But the red lines are not redlining, but the red line is just the outline of the city. Okay, and then there's the population density down below. Okay, so I started looking. Okay, so where do the majority of white people live, and where do the majority of Black or African American people live? And as you can see from the map right here, the darker that you go in the map, that's where the higher concentration of people are. So just kind of to show, and I'm kind of looking. All I can see is Bianca, and I can see Misty. So Misty, if I'm right about this, go like that, or if I'm wrong, go okay.
Aaron, okay. Thank you.
Okay, Aaron. Okay, all right. So here we go. All right. So and also we looked at, okay, so all right, well, this is where people are living. Let's look where the money is. And so according to the census, and you can see right here where you can enter in your information, and then there's a drop down, you can select a fact. So I selected median household income in 2018 dollars. And again, here's the darker the sections are, that's where the more concentration of funding is. Okay, money is. And then I said, well, let's double check. And I used home. So these were places where homes are actually owned, and the value of those homes, the median value of those homes. Okay. And so then we started, wondering, we said, okay, well, I wonder where the tobacco shops are. And now, when we did this, we kind of did it in the last minute. And so I apologize to everyone for doing that in the last minute. And so the quickest place that we could find to show us the information was we did a Google Map search. And so, like I said, I'm not from the area. So again, if there's a mistake or anything like that, please be gentle with me and forgive me on that. We could talk about it. Okay. So this was kind of interesting. So here were the tobacco shops where they were located. And then we started questioning, okay, well, let's see, where are the convenience stores? And as you can see, where the clusters of the convenience stores are. And then we started questioning, okay, well, let's see, where are the wine stores? And we looked where the wine and liquor stores are. And then we started questioning, okay, let's look at where the grocery stores are. And we kind of found out where some of the grocery stores are. So we kind of thought that was very interesting. Now, because of the scale of this, it's kind of hard to, like I said, to plot one-on-one, but just kind of to give you a idea of the landscape of the land. So what ended up happening was, and kind of getting back into this, was, okay, smoking rates declined, okay, over the course of the years. Smoking rates did decline, and they have, but not menthol use. African Americans right now smoke menthol more than any other brand of choice. Actually, it is now, we're at 87% of all the tobacco consumed by African Americans is some form of mentholated tobacco, or all the cigarettes, consumed by African Americans are some form of mentholated cigarettes. It's important. Menthol is primarily associated with African Americans. Okay, so like I was saying, 87% of African American smokers smoke menthol. 90% of cigarettes marketed in the United States contain some form of menthol. It's not to say that even though it doesn't say menthol on the package, it does contain some form of menthol to make it easier to smoke. 32% of all cigarettes sold in the United States are menthols. So menthols are make up a large market share of all the cigarettes consumed in the United States. And Newport cigarettes is the second leading market share or brand of cigarettes in the United States. And Marlboro, I believe, is number one. Okay, so I hope my talk provided you with context to how African Americans were, how Africans were first brought to the Americans, how we endured and collectively survived, but hopefully giving you an idea of how menthol was marketed towards the African American population and how that marketing worked. And again, if you have any questions or any questions?
So Sterling, I have been monitoring the chat box, and I will go ahead and remind everyone that this is kind of our first opportunity to ask questions and have them answered. We'll have a few more short presentations as well after these questions. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. There was one question that came in from yours truly. That I have seen the data that shows that tobacco retailers are clustered in low-income communities in particular. I had not yet heard about the tobacco prices being cheaper in African American communities until just now. And I was wondering if we have any data to support, is that universal for most or many communities of color? Or is that specifically about cheaper tobacco prices in African American neighborhoods in particular?
Okay. It's interesting because also in Native American communities, tobacco's cheaper as well. So it could be it's a marketing scheme by the tobacco products by the tobacco industry to sell their products. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. I know I've seen clusters of tobacco shops in low-income neighborhoods, and I've seen the data to support that even in Kansas City, Missouri. I haven't yet seen that in Kansas City, Kansas yet. But if there are any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. We also will have just a few more presentations and additional opportunities to ask questions at the end. So if you think of others, you can type them in any time throughout this training. But I don't.
Misty,
yes.
I was going to jump in with a question, if you didn't mind, because I know we've got some of our partners on this call who represent Hispanic organizations, and I know that, like, when I look at the numbers, there's also, you see high rates of use in with Hispanics as well. And so I'm just curious, if you, from your perspective, Sterling, and I know obviously your focus and expertise is more with African Americans, but if a lot of the reason for the higher rates also in Hispanic communities is because of similar tactics that the tobacco industry is using, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, yes, it is the same thing. Menthol is actually a product of choice, actually, that has been used by the Hispanic community as well. Again, it makes smoking, it makes it easier to go down. And yes, many of the marketing tactics are the same. Again, making the cigarette prices more attractive, making the cigarette prices more attractive, doing things to hook people, providing free samples of cigarettes, doing all of those things. Yes, it's found primarily in areas in which are low income and where there are people who have low education. Yes, so unfortunately, yes.
Starling, we have one more question in the chat box as well that has come in. Are smoking related diseases and death highest in African American males?
Yes. Yes, unfortunately. Between African American males and African American females, yes, African American males actually, African Americans in general have the highest rate of smoking related death and disease. Native Americans also have a high rate of smoking related death and disease, but unfortunately, often Native Americans, because the population is so small, there has been trouble in terms of even recognizing people who die or who have morbidities related to Native Americans. It's very sad how that number keeping has not been done as well as for other people. Other races. But yes, African American men do have the highest rate of morbidity and mortality due to tobacco use. And that is cancers, heart diseases, all things like that. And it's important, one thing I do want to point out, that when we talk about smoking related disease, we're not just talking about lung cancer. We're also talking about other forms of cancer, bladder cancer. There has been some leakages to pancreatic cancers. I mean, throat cancers. I mean, it's really sad. Yes. Yes. And yes. And also, yes, and Dr. Phil is correct. African-American males do die disproportionately from heart attacks, lung cancers, and strokes compared to other ethnicities. And one thing that's important to keep in mind is that the nicotine actually constricts the blood vessels. So that's important. If you're already experiencing all types of illnesses and things like that, just adding nicotine to that to make your blood vessels even smaller, that is why you're seeing an increase in heart disease. That is why you're seeing an increase in strokes. Yeah. Tobacco is not good. Yes, and as Native American women, yes. Many cigarette products, such as spirit cigarettes, unfortunately, there are certain brands that have been labeled particularly for Native Americans that are that have like a natural label to them that ties in sacred tobacco use with, as many of the cigarette companies, and I've just learned this, have co-opted the term traditional tobacco now. Yes, are appealing to the Native American community. It's not good. And Monica said, my recent experience is seeing our Latino community, okay, teen smoking weed, the flavor of something called reggae. Yeah, it's just okay. All right. Yes. And I'm not an expert on e-cigarettes, not as much as I know about normal, regular cigarettes. But I will say this, with Juul and with vaping, I do know that adding marijuana in there, they're also adding a additive, which is which is like vitamin E kind of additive into that to make that, you know, make you able to do the weed. And it's a combination of those things that are causing significant lung disease and actually in some cases death amongst children.
Yeah, and Erin just said she's going to be talking about vaping as well shortly. Erin is our resident expert on vaping and juuling and e-cigarettes.
Yes, good, thank you. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions you want to type in the chat box? Like I said, this is our first opportunity. So if you think of something over the next few minutes, we can certainly answer that as well at the end.
Well, thank you, Misty, for managing those questions. And certainly, Sterling, that was such a interesting and just fascinating presentation. And I feel like every time I talk to you and your colleagues, I learn so much more. And so I just greatly appreciate you sharing that information and giving us a little bit more details about one of the reasons why these ordinances that we're working on are so important to address the flavors issue. And so Sterling obviously focused her attention on the way that tobacco companies have targeted African-American communities, and especially with the menthol flavor. That is one of our top priorities when it comes to this work that we're doing. But another priority we have that I'm going to present on is around vaping and young people and the epidemic around vape use among young people. This presentation is going to be quite a bit shorter because this is, I think, a topic that most people understand a little more and know a little more about. And because really, if you think about it, when I look back over the last year, prior to when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States in the way that it has, the biggest news story really was around the youth vaping epidemic, and which was one of the many things that sparked us to really put our foot on the gas with this work and look at addressing the flavors issue. And so I'm just going to share a few slides that really kind of go into that and why and how this epidemic has come about. So I am going to share my screen here. All right. I can get it into slideshow mode. There we go. All right. So the good news is that fewer teens are smoking cigarettes than ever before. So in 1997, 1 in 4 teens smoked, yet in 2018, only 1 in 20 smoked. So that is great. Those numbers look so much better, but that took a really long time to get there. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that now we're kind of getting back to where we were in 1997, not with traditional or the combustible cigarettes, but with vaping products. And so while it's exciting that not as many teens nearly smoke, what we're seeing is these alarming rates with vaping. And as an organization, and I know that other health organizations around the country, we don't want it to take, we don't want to take the amount of time that it took to get to improve that number with cigarettes, like with the vaping. We want to fix this issue or impact this issue much faster than we were able to with cigarettes, and which is a reason why ordinances like what we're working on right now in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas are so important. So let's learn a little bit more. Teens and vaping. So e-cigarettes are the most used tobacco products by young people, and kids are using e-cigarettes more frequently than they used traditional cigarettes in the past. So between 2017 and 2018, e-cigarette use rose dramatically. You can see here that in a year, the usage rate rose 78% among high school students and 48% among middle school students. So how did that happen? I mean, those are pretty scary and crazy numbers. And so how did this happen? And the big answer to that is the way that the vaping companies have marketed to kids. Juul has been probably one of the most, if not the most popular product on the market for the last few years. They entered the market with a very sleek design that was very different than anything that had been out there before. It looks very similar to a USB charger that would go into a computer, and it's very low key. The vapor disintegrates very quickly, and the scent is very minimal. So it's much easier for people to use juul in for young people to juul in class, up in their bedrooms, you know, anywhere, because it doesn't leave that trail of scent behind and smoke behind like cigarettes do. You can see here too, for a product that is supposed to be for adults only, it's very clear that these images, and this is marketing campaign from Juul, are really, you know, directed more towards young people, teenagers, than it is towards older individuals who, you know, the whole reason that supposedly that vaping products came onto the market was to be a smoking cessation tool. And these are clearly not really being advertised to people who are just trying to quit smoking. In addition, let me go back. In addition, there's also been a trend called stealth vaping that is really alarming, especially the amount of popularity that we've seen these products gain recently. So these are just 3 examples. All 3 of the pictures on the screen right now are vaping devices, believe it or not. So the backpack has a tube that comes out and a pouch where a vaping canister can be, and the tube just looks like similar to one of those backpacks that have water bottles in it. And so it's very easy to just have in your mouth and easily be taking a puff from it. Same with the sweatshirt. You can see that's a hoodie sweatshirt. And if you look closely, the strings that come out of the hood are actually spots to inhale vape. And the smartwatch is really what kind of blew my mind. It looks very much like an Apple Watch, and it functions as a watch, but you can pop that front off of it, and it's actually a vaping device. So these are all products that are intended to allow individuals to vape on the down low, where they can be in public and nobody's going to even realize it's happening. These products also come in inhaler looking devices that just look like maybe a kid who's using an inhaler. So these products are clearly meant so that teens and young people can really use vaping products without any detection. So you'll see here, and this is an example of why we're really focusing on flavored vape and tobacco products. Fruit is the #1, as of 2019, fruit flavors for vaping products were the most popular product there was on the market for vape. The second most popular was menthol and mint. And so this is why it's so important. You'll see that where it comes like the other flavor down there, those are just standard like tobacco flavor. And you can see that the usage rates for those are so much lower than the fruit and menthol flavors. Obviously, those flavors are a lot easier for young people who have never had experience with tobacco products. Those are a lot easier for them to digest and use. So that's why doing an ordinance or implementing ordinances that eliminates the sale of all flavored tobacco products, menthol and mint, or menthol and fruit included, for whether it's vaping or cigarettes or any tobacco products. That's why it's important to eliminate the sale of those fruity flavors, because it's going to prevent the next generation of individuals from getting hooked and addicted to these nicotine products. So that was my presentation in a nutshell. I told you it was going to be, that it was going to be quite a bit shorter, but like I said, I think we know a lot about these. So before we go into any questions about that, we do have 2 other short presentations. So I think what we're going to do is do those 2, and then we'll come back to all of the questions that we have at the end. So I am really excited now to introduce Bianca Garcia. She has been one of our incredible partners with the Unified Government Health Department. And they have been instrumental in the work that we're doing on the Kansas side of the state line and helping us get this the ordinance moved. So I'm excited to introduce Bianca, and she's going to be sharing a little bit about the relevance of our work and how it pertains to COVID-19. So Bianca, take it away.
Thank you so much, Erin. So I'm excited to share with you all some of the new research that's coming out on tobacco use and COVID-19. So let me go ahead and share my screen so you can see this here. Okay, so like Erin said, I am the Tobacco Cessation and Prevention Coordinator for the Unified Government. So this is something that we've wanted for a while, and so we're excited that we're getting traction, and it is very relevant with what's going on in just all communities right now. So what we know about COVID-19 and tobacco use is that research is still being conducted. So more and more evidence is coming out every day about that association. And so we do know that smoking and vaping do weaken the immune system and impact lung health. So vaping itself, we've learned that can cause cells to fuse together, which reduces lung capacity. And so that makes it more difficult for you to really take in regular breaths like prior to vaping or smoking. Vaping also can cause inflammation in the cells. Exposure to the chemicals in vaping also damage the lungs. Smoking, we know, has been linked to all kinds of respiratory illnesses. So all of that combined together already makes these individuals more susceptible to diagnosis of COVID-19 and also disease progression. So we also know COVID-19 is a respiratory illness. So with that alone, we know that this would just make the issue even more of a challenge. So studies have come out that have shown that linkage between COVID-19 diagnosis and disease progression. So a few possible reasons for this include increased hand-to-mouth contact. E-cigarettes tend to be pretty social products, so there's a lot of sharing going on. And then we know about the respiratory issues due to tobacco use. So with hand-to-mouth contact, we know that there's the possibility that cigarettes could be contaminated. Any surface that we touch could also be contaminated with the virus particles. Vapes are typically reusable, so that also allows for further contamination. Those aren't typically products that are cleaned out very often. So then refilling those with new liquid nicotine can also add to the issue. And so that liquid nicotine is being inhaled that could be contaminated. Then the fingers make contact with the mouth, and that transfer occurs in the mouth. And so there's that increased transmission that could happen. Similar with sharing e-cigarettes, like I said, this is seen as more of a social activity, especially among youth. So this leads to the same issues. There could also be instances where individuals are sharing e-cigarettes and someone may be asymptomatic and not know. So they're really passing on the virus particles and really adding to that transmission. And then we know, like I said, with respiratory issues that are caused by tobacco use, that's already weakening our immune system, weakening the ability to fight off infection. So one study looked at COVID-19 diagnosis and tobacco use. So what this found from the study is that young people who have ever used e-cigarettes, so that may have been tried it a few times, not necessarily are active users, were 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with COVID-19 compared to a non-user. Those who had ever used e-cigarettes or conventional cigarettes, so were dual users, were 7 times more likely to be diagnosed with COVID-19. So similar idea, it's due to the increased hand-to-mouth contact, also due to the lung damage, the impact on health that's already occurring. And so with COVID-19, that chance of diagnosis is much more of a possibility. Another study looked at a collection of studies, so it was a systematic analysis that really evaluated if smoking, vaping, puts you at higher risk of developing a more severe infection. And so when they analyze this collection of studies, they determine that that association is significant between smoking and COVID-19 disease progression. So not only are you more susceptible to being diagnosed with COVID-19, you're also more susceptible to developing more severe infections. So again, that comes back to smoking and vaping damages the lungs. There's harm to the immune system. So our bodies are less able to fight off this infection. The risk of transmission is much higher as well. So infections may not just be mild like they would be in typical cases, but just the fact that this individual is a user could make them more susceptible to a severe infection. So those are the studies that I have to share with you. Like I said, research is coming out daily. And so we know that that link is definitely there. It's a very relevant issue. So the more information that comes out, the more we're sharing with the community.
Well, thank you so much, Bianca. That was really interesting, and I'm guessing that the further we get into these studies, the more we're going to be learning about the tie between tobacco use, e-cigarette use, and COVID. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Next, I am excited to introduce Misty Slater. She is our community advocacy advisor. I may have just said that wrong. I don't know why. All right, great. But we've learned now through this call why we're doing this, the why. The why is the health inequities. It's an equity issue in African-American communities. The why is the youth vaping epidemic and the way this is hitting our young people and truly addicting a whole new generation of young people. And then finally, also this really scary tie to COVID-19 and the way that it impacts anyone that has used tobacco or e-cigarettes at any time. So hopefully what that has done is that has inspired you or really lit a fire under you to want to become involved in these campaigns that we are doing in Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas for these ordinances. So that is what Misty's going to be talking about today, about how you can make an impact and how you can advocate for these.
Yes, we are not just here to share all of this doom and gloom information about how terrible tobacco and e-cigarettes are. We are actually going to give you some tools to be able to do something about it. Thank you, Erin. I'm Misty Slater. I am the Community Advocacy Advisor here at American Heart Association. And at AHA, we have this incredible resource called You're the Cure. And it is this national network of advocates and grassroots community members just like you who are really passionate about improving health and wellness in your community, in your state, and in your country. And You're the Cure is just the platform to help have your voice heard in unison with other community members. And grassroots and You're the Cure is all about passing policies. And so here are just a few ways that you can help join this fight. Through You're the Cure and through our network, there's a lot of different actions that we can take in support of tobacco policies like this flavored tobacco sales restriction ordinance in Kansas City, Kansas, and in Kansas City, Missouri. Some examples, we make it really easy to do, it's called action alerts, but those are emails to your lawmaker, social media posts, phone calls, even letters to the editor to your local newspaper. We also provide different sort of media and spokesperson trainings if you would like to get really involved in those ways as well. In addition to advocacy trainings like this one tonight, where you can learn more about a topic and what you can do about it, and even sharing your story about the impact that these policies have on you. You know, we've heard all about the impact of tobacco and these tactics that are deployed in low-income communities, communities of color, African-American neighborhoods, and with youth. And if you have been personally impacted by this, you can and should tell your story to your lawmaker, to the media, and to others who will listen. But I did want to give you a few examples of how this grassroots network kind of deploys our tools to make it a little bit easier for you to have your voice heard. These local policies, particularly local policies, not just state and federal policies, they move really quick. You know, from introduction to passage, you may have a week or 2 weeks. How can you even know when's the appropriate time to make a phone call or send an email? And that's what these action alerts do. They just really quickly send an email like the one that you see on your screen, that you can click on that link and contact your lawmaker right then. It even helps prepare your message for you, which you can then use and tailor for your own use. It also makes it easy with a click of a button to share your action or share your message on social media. I think it's really important to note that you all and your friends and your family, you are really the influencers in your own personal social network. You know, if we hear a message on the news, it might catch our attention, but if your friend tells you something, it's going to catch your attention in a very different way. And so we also would encourage you all to share messages on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, Snapchat, whatever social media that you like to use. There's also the ability to kind of help make phone calls to your lawmaker on the topics and the policies that you care about most. Hopefully, one of those topics that you care about is kind of flavored tobacco sales restrictions, but really any heart-healthy policy or topic, to tell them that you care about this and that they that your vote and their vote in support would matter as well. So if I have sold you on this sort of grassroots action network, here is the way that you can kind of get involved and take action very quickly and very easily. Pull out your cell phones. For those of you who are on video, not even going to judge you. If you start looking at your cell phone screen, pull it out and text "no to flavors" to 46839. That is no, the number 2, and flavors, all one word, to 46839. And at that point, you're going to get just a link text right back to you within about 30 seconds or less. And you can click on that link, put in your information, and then if you're in the Kansas City area, it might even automatically help you write an email to your lawmaker about this exact policy. If not, you can still get involved. You can still learn all about the tobacco, the nutrition, the physical activity policies in your city, but you might not be involved in the Kansas City campaign, and that's also okay. Health policies happen everywhere across the country, so you can still engage in You're the Cure in whatever way and whatever place makes the most sense to you. So I would encourage you all to get engaged, to text "no to flavors" to 46839, and join us as we advocate for a healthier, happier Kansas City Metro and many, many areas beyond. In case you didn't catch that number, I'm about to stop my screen share, and then I will put that information in the chat box in just a second too. So in case you didn't hear that, it will be in the chat box in just a minute. Thank you guys. And now I will turn it back over to Erin to help moderate if there's any additional questions or final comment.
All right. Well, thank you, Misty. That was really helpful too. And that concludes the formal portion of the night. And so we do encourage you, if there's anything you want to share, any thoughts, any questions, this is the time to type them in the chat box. This is our last opportunity, but certainly all of us here would love to hear from you, in the coming weeks about your interest or any questions you might have as well. So, and in fact, I will type my email address in the chat box, and you can reach out to me if there is anything that you want to, any one of us that you want to reach out to. I can help connect you. So see if I can talk and type at the same time. But thank you. I'm so appreciative of seeing these this great feedback. I'm glad that you guys feel like it was worth your time and everything. So actually, Sarah did just ask a question. Have you all seen any pushback locally to banning menthol flavors? And I can start this one and then anybody else can jump in. So I will say, fortunately, we really have not had, we have not seen much, if any, pushback locally. Kansas City's always been a fairly progressive metro area when it comes to tobacco legislation. We were an early adapter of clean indoor air laws, meaning that got rid of smoking indoors. And then, and same with Tobacco 21. This is obviously a bit different because of, this just is a little different when you've got the health equity angle. And so nationally, there is an opposition group that tends to look for campaigns like this, and they tend to come in with misleading messaging and make it appear that legislation like this is actually harmful to communities of color, specifically African American communities. They're really manipulative with their wording. So far, we have not heard from that opposition. We will not be surprised if we hear that in the next couple of weeks. But that's why the work, these types of presentations like we're doing tonight are so important, because it's important to us that individuals in Kansas City, the constituents in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas, really know the truth before they hear these misleading messages. So anybody else, feel free to add to that by all means.
I just have to, first of all, thank everyone tonight for the excellent presentation. But I was excited that when I texted the recommendation, as you said, the no to flavors, and saw that it came up with a letter already pretty much drafted. It was really exciting to me, because I know, especially being a freshman elected official, the impact that those letters do have, those emails, phone calls, they work, especially when we receive multiple, up to hundreds or thousands in some cases. So I want to just encourage you all to share with your family, friends, other people who would like to see this ban, to please ask them to engage and support by making phone calls or texting or emailing this information, because it does work. Thank you.
That's great to hear, Councilwoman Parkshaw. Thank you for that feedback. And I believe we were just added one more person from the Center for Black Health and Equity, Kenny Ray. I believe he was wanting to share a few thoughts. So go ahead, Kenny.
Good evening to everyone. And again, thank you for all of the local leadership, the American Heart Association, Misty and Aaron. Thank you, Councilwoman Parkshaw, for your leadership. And Ms. Garcia, thank you for your leadership in saving lives in 2 areas of Kansas City. We at the Center for Black Health and Equity applaud the work that's going on in your community. We oftentimes look at this as a social justice issue for us. It's very important to understand that in most urban centers with high populations of African American, Black and brown people, that the chronic disease rates in those states are similar in most municipalities that have populations of 250,000 or more. The African American and poor populations have the highest rates of chronic disease. Tobacco is the #1 leading risk factor for chronic disease in the United States, according to the Center for Disease Control Office on Smoking and Health. All of that it just connects the dots for why this work is important. The last thing I'll leave you with is that there are federal, state, and local laws that are currently in place, that have been in place for decades, that have created this environment. Under the Obama administration, the Tobacco Family Protection Act was very instrumental and giving us a lot of the protections that we have right now around tobacco. It gave the Food and Drug Administration the authority to regulate all tobacco products. This is very important because this was not done in any prior regime within the White House and in government. But what it did do was it said, okay, all flavors are banned except for menthol. And there was an argument and debate around whether menthol was a flavor. And so because of those arguments and debates, menthol was left out of the federal legislation. So the Food and Drug Administration is being sued currently by leading organizations around the country that we have partnered with, and we're not a part of the lawsuit, but we are concerned about how that organization that is designed to protect all Americans are unable to protect the people who are most targeted for menthol flavored products. So we encourage you to take action at the local level, given that our federal level is not taking action, and we thank you and applaud you for all that you're doing. So power to the people.
Thank you for that, Kenny. I was on mute. All these months of Zoom and I still forget to unmute myself. I did just want to, I know that there was Monica Mendez had asked a question about the timing of this, and there were some answers in the chat, but just thought I'd let Misty share a little bit more from the perspective of both sides of the state line. So go ahead, Misty.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really looking at introduction later this month with passage early in November. So I also recognize this is a really busy time when you think about everything going on with politics across the country. So we don't want this to get drowned out by everything going on nationally. So if you do have an opportunity or an interest in either supporting, whether it's through written testimony or a letter of support or an email, or whatever the case might be, a logo on a kind of a shared endorsement letter, let us know. We have lots of different opportunities and ways for you to engage in whatever way makes the most sense for you as a person or for your organization that you might be representing as well. So please just let us know. Erin put her email address into the chat box as well, so we can reach out to you and find the best way for you to engage most efficiently and easily for you in a way that fits your needs.
Thanks, Misty. That is helpful. All right. Well, it is 6:27, so I'm going to give you 3 minutes back to your evening. But thank you again for your participation. We really greatly appreciate it and hope to see you continue to engage in this work over the next few weeks and beyond, because once we are successful in Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas, which I know we will be looking to expand further into the metro. So we are excited for that, and thank you all so much. We have recorded this tonight and we'll be sharing it broadly. So please feel free, once you get that link, to share this far and wide as well to anybody, individuals or organizations that you think would want to get involved. Thank you all. Have a great night.